March 8, 2014, a commercial airliner carrying 239 people simply vanished. No distress call, no explosion detected, no confirmed crash site. Just silence. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, heading toward Beijing. It was supposed to be a routine red-eye flight lasting less than 6 hours. Instead, it became what many documentary experts now call the greatest aviation mystery in history. How does a modern Boeing 777 disappear in the 21st century, in a world filled with radar systems, satellites, and advanced tracking technology? Tonight, we dive deep into the mystery of MH370. The timeline, the investigation, the shocking gaps, and the theories that continue to divide. It was just after midnight on March 8, 2014. Inside Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the terminal was quieter than usual. Most travelers were either asleep in their seats or slowly boarding the late-night flights that would carry them across Asia before sunrise. At Gate C1, passengers began boarding a routine overnight flight to Beijing. The aircraft waiting on the runway was a Boeing 777, one of the most advanced and reliable passenger aircraft in the world. Its flight number was Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. On board were 239 people, 227 passengers from 14 different countries, and 12 crew members. Families, business travelers, tourists, students, people with plans, schedules, and lives waiting for them on the other side of the journey. For them, it was just another flight. For the world, it would soon become one of the greatest aviation mysteries in history. At exactly 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 pushed back from the gate and slowly taxied toward the runway. In the cockpit sat Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with more than 18,000 hours of flying experience. Beside him was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, a younger pilot still building his career. Everything about the flight seemed completely normal. The aircraft lifted into the night sky and began climbing toward its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. From the outside, it was invisible in the darkness. Inside the cabin, most passengers were settling in for sleep. Some watched movies. Others listened to music. Many were already asleep. No one on board had any idea they were part of a moment that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. The plane headed northeast over the South China Sea toward Vietnam. Air traffic control communication was calm and routine. Pilots regularly communicate with different control centers as they move through airspace zones. Everything followed standard procedure. Then came the final routine message. At 1:19 a.m., as the aircraft prepared to leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese control, the cockpit transmitted its final words.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, Malaysian 370. Those would be the last confirmed words ever heard from the flight. Minutes later, something strange happened. The aircraft's transponder, the device that sends identification signals to civilian radar, suddenly stopped transmitting. To air traffic controllers, the plane simply disappeared from their screens. Just like that, gone. First, no one panicked. Air traffic controllers assumed the aircraft had simply crossed into Vietnamese airspace, where a new radar system would take over. But Vietnamese controllers never saw the plane arrive. Time passed. Minutes turned into nearly 20 minutes. Still no contact. When Malaysian controllers attempted to reach the aircraft again, there was only silence. Something was clearly wrong. But what? Did the plane experience a technical failure? Did the crew lose communication? Or something far more mysterious? At that moment, no one could imagine how complicated the situation would become. For hours, the world believed MH370 had disappeared somewhere over the South China Sea. But days later, investigators uncovered something shocking. Military radar systems had captured an unidentified aircraft making a dramatic turn. Instead of continuing toward Beijing, the plane had suddenly changed direction. It turned west, back across the Malaysian peninsula. Then it continued flying over the Andaman Sea. This meant the aircraft had not crashed immediately. It had kept flying. Someone or something had deliberately changed its course. But why? And who was controlling the plane? By sunrise, families were already waiting at Beijing Capital International Airport. They watched the arrival board. The scheduled landing time came and went. But flight MH370 never arrived. Airport staff began making quiet phone calls. Airline officials gathered in small rooms. The situation was becoming impossible to ignore. A modern commercial airliner carrying 239 people had vanished. No distress signal. No confirmed crash. No wreckage. Nothing. What began as a delayed flight was quickly turning into a global mystery. News networks around the world began reporting the story. Governments launched emergency investigations. And one question echoed everywhere. How could a massive Boeing 777 simply disappear? That night, a routine overnight flight had quietly turned into the beginning of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. And the truth about what happened to MH370 was only just beginning to unfold. In aviation, communication is everything. Every commercial flight in the world stays in constant contact with air traffic controllers. Pilots report their altitude, confirm instructions, and coordinate their path through the skies. Thousands of these conversations happen every hour. Most of them are routine, predictable, almost boring. But sometimes, one of those messages becomes the last thing anyone ever hears from an aircraft. For Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, that moment came at 1:19 a.m. As the aircraft approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, the crew prepared for a routine handoff. This process happens on nearly every international flight. When an aircraft leaves one country's airspace, the pilot simply switches radio frequencies and begins communicating with the next air traffic control center. Nothing unusual. Malaysian controllers instructed the aircraft to contact Ho Chi Minh Control in Vietnam. A calm voice came from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370. The message sounded completely normal. No panic, no urgency, no indication that anything was wrong. Those 5 words would become some of the most analyzed words in aviation history, because they were the last confirmed communication from the plane. Moments after the transmission, something strange happened. The aircraft's transponder stopped sending signals. A transponder is a critical device on an aircraft. It sends identifying information to radar systems, allowing controllers to track the plane's exact location and altitude. When it stopped transmitting, MH370 vanished from civilian radar screens. At first, air traffic controllers didn't think much of it. They assumed the aircraft had already switched to Vietnamese airspace and was communicating with Ho Chi Minh controllers. But Vietnamese controllers never heard from the plane. They waited and waited. Still nothing. After several attempts to establish contact, they realized something was wrong. The aircraft had not checked in, and no one knew where it was. The confusion between the 2 air traffic control centers caused a critical delay. Each side initially believed the other had contact with the aircraft. Minutes passed, then nearly 20 minutes. Finally, calls began going back and forth between Malaysian and Vietnamese authorities. Neither side had the plane on radar. Neither side had communication with the crew. Somewhere over the night sky of Southeast Asia, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people had gone silent, and no one knew why. In most aviation emergencies, pilots send a distress signal. They declare a mayday call, or at least report a technical problem. But from MH370, there was nothing. No emergency call, no warning signal, no message of any kind. Just those final words. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Then silence. At that moment, no one realized they were witnessing the beginning of a mystery that would capture the attention of the entire world. because what investigators would later discover made the situation even more puzzling. The plane had not simply vanished. It had changed course, dramatically, and someone or something had turned it around. For several hours after the disappearance, investigators believed the aircraft had crashed somewhere in the South China Sea. It seemed like the most logical explanation. After all, the plane vanished from civilian radar while flying along its normal route to Beijing. But days later, investigators uncovered something that completely changed the direction of the investigation. Military radar had recorded something unusual, something no one expected. The aircraft had turned around. While civilian radar lost contact with the plane shortly after its final transmission, military radar systems were still quietly tracking objects moving through the sky. When Malaysian military officials reviewed their radar data, they noticed an unidentified aircraft making a strange maneuver. Instead of continuing northeast toward China, the aircraft made a sharp turn. It reversed direction. The plane flew back across the Malaysian peninsula, directly over the country it had just departed. Investigators soon confirmed the unsettling truth. That unidentified radar signal was most likely Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. This meant the aircraft had not crashed immediately after disappearing. It was still flying, and someone or something had deliberately changed its course. The aircraft continued westward over the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Yet somehow, no ships reported seeing anything unusual in the sky. No distress signals were received. No emergency messages were transmitted. The aircraft appeared to be flying normally, almost as if nothing was wrong. But there was one major difference. The plane was now effectively invisible to civilian radar. Without its transponder, air traffic controllers could no longer identify it. To most radar systems, it looked like just another unidentified object in the night sky. In the night sky, investigators later noticed something even stranger about the plane's new path. It appeared to follow a series of precise navigation waypoints, invisible checkpoints in the sky used by pilots to guide long-distance flights. These were not random movements. The aircraft seemed to be flying a deliberate route, almost like someone in the cockpit was still controlling it. But who and why? At around 2:22 a.m., military radar lost contact with the aircraft completely. After that moment, there were no more radar sightings. The plane had vanished again. But this time, investigators knew something important. MH370 had continued flying for at least an hour after disappearing from civilian radar. That single discovery transformed the investigation. Because if the aircraft had stayed in the air that long, it could be almost anywhere. And what investigators would discover next would make the mystery even more disturbing. The aircraft may have continued flying for 6 more hours, deep into some of the most remote regions on Earth. For hours after it vanished from radar, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was still flying. But how do we know that? Satellites. Even though the aircraft's transponder was turned off, it was still sending automatic signals, known as handshakes, to a satellite system. These signals didn't reveal the exact location, but they revealed something far more disturbing. The plane was still in the air for nearly 7 hours. 7 hours of silence. 7 hours of a plane flying with no communication, no tracking, and no explanation. Investigators later mapped these signals into what became known as the arcs. 2 possible paths emerged: a northern route towards Central Asia, or a southern route deep into the Indian Ocean. One of them led to land. The other led to nowhere. Section 5. As the world realized MH370 was missing, a massive search operation began. At first, all efforts focused on the South China Sea. Ships were deployed. Aircraft scanned the skies. Rescue teams searched for survivors. But there was one problem. There was nothing to find. No debris, no oil spill, no signal. It was as if the plane had vanished into thin air. Days later, the search zone shifted, then shifted again and again. Each new piece of data changed everything. Each mistake cost time. And in a mystery like this, time is everything. Eventually, investigators reached a chilling conclusion. The aircraft most likely flew south, into the Indian Ocean, one of the most remote and unforgiving places on Earth. No nearby airports, no radar coverage, no easy rescue. If the plane went there, it was never meant to be found. Australia led the largest ocean search in aviation history. Ships scanned the ocean floor. Sonar technology mapped the seabed. Over 120 square kilometers were searched. But still, nothing. More than a year later, in July 2015, a piece of debris was found on Réunion Island, a remote island in the Indian Ocean. It was part of a wing, a flaperon, and after careful analysis, it was confirmed. It belonged to MH370. Finally, proof. The plane had crashed. But this discovery raised even more questions. If debris reached Africa, where exactly did the plane go down? And why hadn't the main wreckage been found? With no clear answers, theories began to spread. Some believed it was a mechanical failure, a sudden loss of oxygen, leaving everyone unconscious. Others believed something far more intentional. The pilot, could he have deliberately flown the plane off course? The flight path, the controlled turns, the long journey south, it all suggested someone was in control. Then came darker theories, hijacking, terrorism, even secret conspiracies, but none of them had solid proof. And that's what makes this mystery so powerful. There are possibilities, but no answers. As the investigation continued, so did the criticism. Why wasn't military radar shared immediately? Why did it take days to realize the plane had turned back? Why was there confusion between countries? In a world filled with advanced technology, how could a modern aircraft simply disappear? These questions still remain unanswered, and they may have cost investigators their best chance at finding the truth. Behind the mystery were real people, 239 lives, families waiting at airports, phones that never rang, messages that were never answered. For them, this isn't just a mystery, it's a wound that never healed. Some still believe their loved ones could be alive. Others just want closure. But closure requires answers, and answers are still missing. More than a decade later, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in human history. A Boeing 777, gone, without a trace. No black box, no final message, no clear explanation, just questions. Was it an accident? Was it deliberate? Or is there something we still don't understand? Somewhere, deep beneath the Indian Ocean, the truth still exists, waiting to be discovered. So now we ask you, what do you think happened to MH370? Let us know in the comments, because one day, the truth may finally surface.